Welcome back to the channel. This will be my team selection for Gameweek 12 in Fantasy Premier League, where I still have the wildcard and free hit chips available. I'll be discussing my chip strategy for the first half of the campaign after using the free hit and triple captain boosters, but you can see my FPL challenge squad on screen. I've currently gone for Robert Sanchez, Marcus Senesi, Imbumo, Rice, Gravenberch, and Mateta, because this week the challenge is called In Possession, so +6 points are allocated for players who achieve 90% pass completion and they have to attempt at least 30 passes. So that's why I've got the likes of Gravenberch and Declan Rice in there, but I am open to changing this, and you will see my final FPL challenge and FPL teams during Saturday's deadline stream. Be sure not to miss it by liking this video, getting it to over 150 likes, and also subscribing to the channel, hitting that notification bell in the process. I aim is also to get to new goals like 38k on YouTube. Only a couple of weeks ago, we hit 37,000 in a UCL Fantasy deadline stream. And speaking of which, there will be a best wildcard and limitless squad for the Champions League. The same goes to my team selection and another deadline stream next Tuesday. So keep your eyes peeled for all of that content. The same goes for more FPL videos and live streams. There could be a reaction stream on Saturday. I'll keep you posted about that in due course. And if you want to see a predicted lineups podcast, then make sure to show your support. Also, let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below and all that good stuff. Let's also grow my social media platforms, Twitter, Instagram, and Blue Sky. You can find me by typing FPL Dylan or Dylan RCM. There's my Discord server, the FPL and FPL Challenge Leagues, Spotify, and much more. If you want to support the channel even further and gain early access to my videos, prior to comments, amongst many other perks, then become a patron or channel member by clicking the join button on YouTube or going to patreon.com/FPL Dylan. But without further ado, let's jump straight into this. As usual, I'll start off with a review of the previous match day, which was a couple of weeks ago now, before the international break. And one of the decisions I made a couple of weeks ago, before Chelsea played Tottenham Hotspur, has paid off, because I had a decision to sell Robert Sanchez to David Raya or Pedro Porro to Jurrien Timber. And in the end, I kept Robert Sanchez. He kept a clean sheet against Tottenham Hotspur and followed that up with another one against Wolves in a 3-0 win, whilst Pedro Porro has been quite shambolic as an FPL asset in that time frame. And ultimately with Jurrien Timber, nothing special. He got 6 points against Burnley when I bought him in, and you'll see his return against Sunderland very soon. But at least with Robert Sanchez, I avoided that goalkeeper transfer, which I don't like making in the first place, and my plan was always to make a goalkeeper change on the wild card, and that will likely be deployed in either Gameweek 12 or 13. But there are a lot of yellow flags to key FPL assets, and my team will be in a bit of a difficult predicament going into the upcoming deadline. As for my defensive line though, I had a double Arsenal defense and it hasn't paid off this time round, and this is only the second week now that I've had a double up in the Gunners defensively, and it did pay off of course against Burnley with both Gabriel and Timber getting 6 pointers, but that wasn't the case against Sunderland. They conceded twice, and I think Arsenal were very shaky defensively. They created so many chances in that game and dominated the second half until the very end, when they were kind of sitting back a little bit and they should have gone on to win the match, but they made some critical errors at the back. Even Gabriel was a bit shaky for one of the goals, and David Raya should have done much better for the second, scored by Brobby in the dying embers of that game. But Gabriel is now an injury out. He is yellow flagged in FPL, which gives you a bit of hope that he's going to be available for the North London derby in Gameweek 12. That will not be the case. Several reports from reliable journalists indicate he is set to miss at least 4 weeks worth of action, and others even indicate he could be out until January. So that's a massive blow for the Gunners. Gabriel's a real leader at the back. He's got that set piece threat, of course, and in both boxes he's so important. So Arsenal are going to miss his leadership, but they have so much depth defensively that the likes of Hincapié or Mosquera could come in to replace Gabriel and partner Saliba at the back. And I think Hincapié is a bit more likely because he is left-footed, and Arsenal like to have that sort of balance in those centre-back areas. But Jurrien Timber is set to be the best Arsenal defender now for the run-in. You do have Ben White knocking on the door, and there could be the odd rotation here and there. But as I've said all along, apart from Gabriel, my favourite way of covering Arsenal defensively is with David Raya between the sticks, and that's a change I would make on the wild card, which I'll show you very soon. But my other defender was the standout in Lacroix. He got a clean sheet in a goalless draw against Brighton, and Mark Gay missed out, and he is still yellow flagged going into the Gameweek 12 deadline. But as discussed in my Transfer Tips podcast, I believe Mark Gay will be available, and that's only going to bolster Crystal Palace's options at the back against Wolves away and going into the upcoming fixtures, which look very promising for the Eagles. As for my four midfielders, one of them is yellow flagged in Antoine Semenyo, and he missed a penalty. That was a very common theme in Gameweek 11 for a lot of people. Ndai blanked and was quite disappointing in a 2-0 win over Fulham. And Ismaila Sarr has been very frustrating as an FPL asset, but he certainly has that high ceiling, and unfortunately he's getting those big returns in other competitions like the Europa Conference League and the Carabao Cup, where he scored a brace against Liverpool. But that's not the case in the Premier League. That's where we want the points, and Ismaila Sarr has paled in comparison to Jean-Philippe Mateta and also midfielders who are priced similarly to Ismaila Sarr himself. Bruno Fernandes was the only midfielder to return in Gameweek 11. He got that assist in the 96th minute to set up the equaliser for De Ligt from a set piece, and he has been fairly consistent over the last month or so, but Bryan Mbeumo has been a step ahead when it comes to FPL output, especially with the goals from open play. And as for my free forwards, they did the job in Gameweek 11. All of them returned. Nick Voltemade got a fantasy assist for Harvey Barnes, who opened the scoring against Brentford in a 3-1 defeat there for Newcastle. Erling Haaland missed a penalty, but still scored against Liverpool in a 3-0 win and only got 4 points as his baseline score and 8 points overall as my captain. And Joao Pedro got a goal against Wolves in that 3-0 victory. And that's pretty much it. Nothing special, but all of this was enough for a green arrow, as you'll see very soon. And just look at my horrendous bench. Only 2 points from 4 players. Dan Burn picked up a second booking. He's going to miss Gameweek 12 after that red card, and he will be available for Gameweek 13. And if it wasn't for Defcon, he would have got minus points in Gameweek 11. Reinders didn't play a single minute. Renilo Mandava conceded twice and was booked against Arsenal, and Dubravka got 2 points, and that's pretty much it. My bench has been awful over the last couple of weeks, and unfortunately I played the bench boost. I managed to get 5 points from my 4 bench players, but that's far better than what I would have done this week, for example. So it's another green arrow of around 100,000 places by just getting 45 points. It was a very low scoring match day in general, so I'm happy to have gotten a green arrow and we can run away from it. And whenever you go into an international break with that sort of green arrow, you have that sort of confidence and you can be a bit calmer. You don't need to, overthink things a little bit. You've got a bit more confidence in your setup. And over the past 8 game weeks, I believe I've got 6 green arrows minimum. So it has been a very decent sort of trajectory over the last month or two, but it's still time to push on even further. And that's where the wildcard and free hit could be very handy. And I want to show you some transfer plans in every single position. But before I do that, let's discuss some prices. Robert Sanchez is still 4.8 million, but keeping him has been a good decision over the last 2 game weeks. Lacroix is still 5 million, whilst Jurrien Timber went up a few days ago to 6.2 million, and Gabriel remains the most expensive defender in the game, but a price drop is inevitable, and that yellow flag will turn into an orange and then red flag very soon over the next couple of days, especially after Mikel Arteta's press conference on Friday. Bruno Fernandes is still 8.9 million, and Bryan Mbeumo is only 0.4 million cheaper at this stage of the season. Ismaila Sarr is 6.7, but he's not offering any returns at the moment, and Antoine Semenyo has risen in price more than anybody else so far in this campaign. But with that yellow flag, potentially missing out against West Ham, which will be covered, of course, in my upcoming videos and the deadline stream on Saturday, that could also result in a price drop to 8 million fairly soon. Ndai is 6.6. I'm still fairly happy with him, and even if he does blank in the next game, I still think he's got the credit in the bank to remain in my squad in the long term. Even in a wildcard, for example, he could maybe keep his spot. Joao Pedro is 7.5 million. Erling Haaland's the most expensive player in the game at 14.9, and Nick Voltemade is 7.4 million. As for the players on my bench, both Dubravka and Renilo Mandava remain at 4 million, so nothing special there. Dan Burn is still 5.2, and Reinders is 5.5, but he has been a massive disappointment since that big return in the opening game week of the season against Wolves, where we thought Reinders could be a quality FPL asset, but that hasn't been the case, and he doesn't even start for Man City. But between the sticks, the main transfer I'd look to make is Robert Sanchez to David Raya, despite the fact that Arsenal have some tough fixtures on the horizon, like Tottenham and Chelsea up next, and sandwiched in between is Bayern Munich in the Champions League, and I also own David Raya in UCL Fantasy. But Robert Sanchez is still a decent goalkeeper to have, and I would rank him in the top 5 for sure, possibly even in the top 3, but I think Raya is a level above when it comes to clean sheets, the consistency, and there is a big difference in price. 1.1 million separates the 2 Spaniards, but I think Raya justifies the most expensive price tag in the game amongst goalkeepers, and I just don't think any other goalkeeper will really stack up to him in the long term. He is second for points scored amongst goalkeepers, only behind Rufs, but I think there will be a disparity over the next month or so, and Arsenal have some good fixtures after the next 2 London derbies against Chelsea and Tottenham, so that's going to be very interesting to see. But with Arsenal defensively, I'm quite keen on covering them with David Raya and maybe avoiding a double or triple up in the end, which I also discussed in my best wildcard squad video yesterday. And it's also worth mentioning, of course, using the website FPL.team in this podcast, because I've got a few ideas of how I'd structure things using that chip in Gameweek 12 or 13. As for my defender transfers, I am looking at doing something like this: Gabriel to Virgil van Dijk as a like-for-like replacement, and I also like Daniel Munoz to also replace the Brazilian here in Gabriel. And like I said before, you can ignore the yellow flag a little bit because that's going to turn into a red one very soon. I just don't see Gabriel being available in the next couple of matches unless something ridiculous happens, and Arsenal have kept things under wraps to a very good extent. I just don't think that's going to be the case. And Virgil van Dijk has the best fixtures over the next 3 game weeks. Liverpool have the clean sheet potential based on the quality of the opponents. I think they will be massive favourites, particularly in those home games. And Van Dijk can couple that with a goal, defensive contributions, and bonus points in the process. So now is a good time to buy Virgil van Dijk. For those that own the Dutchman, I would highly recommend keeping him. But unfortunately, Gabriel Magalhaes is a very clear sell, as highlighted in my Transfers podcast. Another defender transfer I would look to make is selling the suspended Dan Burn to Daniel Munoz. So I think having both of those premium defenders could work in my favour. And as for Crystal Palace, I'm still quite keen on the likes of Mark Gay and Chris Richards. And Lacroix is still decent, but he has been a bit underwhelming at times, and he always offers that sort of set piece threat, but he never really delivers on that front, and he underperforms when it comes to the XG and big chances. But Munoz is really exciting to own. The same goes for Bryan Mbeumo, who is very template at this moment in time, but not as template as Antoine Semenyo, who has over 60% ownership, and he does cost 8.1 million. I've got a lot of value tied up in the Ghanaian, but I think Bryan Mbeumo could be an upgrade, and there is the chance that Antoine Semenyo misses out against West Ham at home, which was such a plum fixture on paper over the last couple of weeks. Despite some improvements from Nuno Espirito Santo and his side, they are starting to get there with back-to-back wins, and Bournemouth have been a little bit shaky over the last month. But the final transfer I want to highlight is up front. Nick Voltemada is worth keeping. I don't think he's a priority sell, but going to one of Igor Thiago or Jean-Philippe Mateta is certainly a recommendation of mine. And apart from those two, Erling Haaland is the only other striker I would buy to replace Nick Voltemada. But if you disagree, let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. I would rank Voltemada in 4th or 5th amongst forwards right now. That could well change. And looking at Game Week 12 specifically, you would rank Joao Pedro slightly higher because of that fixture against Burnley away. But I think Voltemada is still decent against Man City at home. I don't think he is a priority sell and you have to rush to the likes of Thiago or Mateta necessarily, but I think that is a clear pathway for many who own the German. So with all of this in mind, this is my provisional team selection for Game Week 12, and the wild card will be deployed for the upcoming deadline or in Game Week 13. But I think a key reason why the wild card could be held off for another week in my situation is because I've got 2 Chelsea players facing Burnley away, and I wouldn't be bringing these players in on the wild card. Sanchez away to Burnley looks very appealing. I think a clean sheet is possible. They are ranked 2nd in terms of the clean sheet odds, only behind Arsenal, which I talked about in my best wildcard video, and that's why keeping Robert Sanchez for another week could pay off, and the best time to sell him is in Game Week 13 when he hosts Arsenal. As for my defensive line, I would have a double up in the Arsenal defence as things stand, but I think Gabriel will miss out. So then you're looking at Renildo Mandava away to Fulham, replacing him in my starting 11 unless I make a transfer, because my other option, Dan Burn, is suspended. I'm quite happy to start Jurrien Timber against Tottenham at home, and even on the wild card, I'd probably bring him in, especially if I don't go for David Raya between the sticks. And having Lacroix away to Wolves still looks very solid. So if it wasn't for that injury to Gabriel, I'd be in a very good position in my defensive line, but now it looks a little bit shaky with his injury and Dan Burn's suspension. Let's now move on to the midfield, where Antoine Semenyo is also yellow flagged. I'm more optimistic about his chances of featuring in Game Week 12 against West Ham, but that isn't a certainty, and I provided the latest injury updates in my Transfers podcast, and I think Semenyo will be available, and if that's the case, he is worth holding on to in most situations. He would have been a consideration for the captaincy against West Ham at home, but his form has dipped recently and the yellow flag won't help things too much. I think the Hammers could pose some problems there to the Cherries, so that isn't a guaranteed victory, even though Bournemouth are the better side. I think Ndiaye and Bruno Fernandes facing each other in the same game could be decent still. Ndiaye has DEFCON potential, the same goes for Bruno Fernandes. Both of them are on penalties, and from open play, they still offer plenty of threat, especially Ndiaye with the goals and Bruno Fernandes creating those chances for his teammates. And Bryan Mbeumo is in great form right now and would probably see Matheus Cunha start up front with Mbeumo and Amad Diallo just behind him, and that's a pretty good attacking line for Manchester United. And Ismaila Sarr has to get a return fairly soon, and facing Wolves away, despite them appointing a new manager in Rob Edwards, I still think Crystal Palace are the massive favourites to win and score a few goals in the process at the Molineux, but Ismaila Sarr has to deliver very soon. The same goes to my front line, who did the job in Gameweek 11, but I still want a little bit more going forwards. Joao Pedro and Haaland look great this week. I know Haaland is facing Newcastle away, so there is the opportunity to go against him for the captaincy, like we saw against Liverpool last week, but I still think Haaland is the default captain right now, with the lack of premium options really challenging him on a consistent basis with a high ceiling, and Joao Pedro could be one of those options in a week like this, facing Burnley away, and he has shown a little bit of form recently. He's a very streaky player, which we saw at Brighton over the last couple of years, and for Chelsea, despite a few blips and bad moments, going 5 games without scoring in the Premier League, he has still been fairly consistent when you also factor in the Club World Cup. And Nick Voltemade is Newcastle's best asset, particularly in the offensive positions. Anthony Gordon is still a doubt, but there are reports that indicate he could be available against Man City. But in the Premier League, he has 0 goals and 0 assists. He has been the standout Newcastle player in the Champions League, whilst Nick Voltemade hasn't really reached those heights in that competition. But when it comes to the Premier League, Nick Voltemade is getting the bulk of the goals. And then you have Jacob Murphy, Harvey Barnes, Tonali and Bruno Guimaraes spreading the goals out between them. And Newcastle have been much better in the Champions League in general, with few outstanding performers in the Premier League, with the exception of Nick Voltemade, who is relied upon heavily for the goals and his link-up play. But amongst forwards, I think Jean-Philippe Mateta is the clear standout and probably second in the overall rankings for forwards. Erling Haaland is clearly top, and Igor Thiago is definitely in that sort of podium, and buying one of those two forwards could certainly work out to replace Nick Voltemade this week. I think Mateta would be my preference, and Thiago is a player you could start in every single game, even against Arsenal away, where he is arguably benchable, but I wouldn't be surprised if he walked away from the Emirates with a return, especially with him being on penalties. Now, on my bench, it looks horrendous. I've got Dubravka at home to Chelsea, so I'm going to favour Sanchez in that direct clash. I've got Reinders, who is second on my bench this time, facing Newcastle away. I don't think he's going to start there in the Premier League. Dan Burn is suspended, facing Man City at home, so he will be last on my bench. And Reinildo Mandava will likely replace Gabriel. So as you can see, I could be down to the bare bones in my starting 11 and just about form that starting 11. But I've got 2 free transfers at my disposal, so I don't need to use the wildcard just yet. But my sort of plan was to save up on transfers as much as possible and maybe have 3 or 4 transfers after deploying the wildcard. But as you can see, if I was in a position of strength, Voltemade to Mateta would have been on the cards. I've only got 0.4 million in the bank though, so that requires a transfer elsewhere. If Antoine Semenyo is ruled out, that's where I could find a little bit of money. And even with Gabriel Magalhaes, downgrading him to Virgil van Dijk could give me a bit of money as well to then buy Mateta up front. But I just have a lot of issues at the moment with the injuries and also the suspension to Dan Burn, and then players not featuring like Reinders. But I don't think Reinildo or any Sunderland defender is terrible to start against Fulham away, but Fulham are actually near the top of the clean sheet odds, and Sunderland will not have that sort of favouritism from the bookmakers and the odds overall. When it comes to the captaincy, it seems very boring, but my current plan is to go for Erling Haaland, and Joao Pedro is the vice, but I'm quite open to changing things up a little bit when it comes to the armband this week, and you can see my top 10 captaincy options towards the very end of this video and the final version during Saturday's deadline stream, so stay tuned for that. But before I show you FPL.team and visualizing how my wildcard will look like and a potential free hit draft for Gameweek 12, you can see the expected points which are provided by the website Fantasy Football Hub, and Robert Sanchez offers 3.9 predicted points, whilst Dubravka offers 3.3. Lacroix is at 4.2, and Jurrien Timber is at 4.6, and Gabriel was very high before the injury at around 5.5 to 6, but now he has gone down to 4.5, and don't be surprised to see him drop to 0 very soon. Bruno Fernandes is at 6.1. He is one of the very highest in my 15-man squad, and Ismaila Sarr has 4.8. He needs to get some goal contributions very soon, and Antoine Semenyo is at 5, despite the yellow flag going into that West Ham game. Ndai is at 4.9 at Old Trafford, while Joao Pedro, who is my vice-captain, offers 5.1 predicted points, so he is actually third amongst my 15-man squad, and Erling Haaland is top once more at 7.4 amongst all players. Nick Voltemada is quite low at 4.3, and then you've got Ranilo Mandava at 3, who has to come in for Gabriel in my starting 11 unless I make a transfer in that defensive line. Reinders is at 1.8, and Dan Burn offers nothing whatsoever at 0.0 because of that suspension. He'll be available in Gameweek 13, and remember, if it's like a last man, professional foul, then that's only going to be a 1-game ban, even if it's a direct red card. A second booking, like we saw with Dan Burn, is only going to be a 1-game ban. If it's foul play, though, that's where things can be extended a little bit, and you can see a player banned for 2 or 3 matches, sometimes even more than that, depending on the severity of the challenge itself. But that is my 50-man squad with the expected points, and this is without making any transfers whatsoever. I've got the wildcard and free hit chips in my back pocket, and 2 transfers at my disposal, but FPL.team is a great website to visualize future game weeks and compare different transfer plans and chip strategies to optimize our FPL setups. The main reason why I'd hold out on the wildcard for another week is because of my double up in the Chelsea team with Joao Pedro and Robert Sanchez, but if the likes of Antoine Semenyo, Gabriel are ruled out, I've got Dan Burn suspended, and other issues arise, then the wildcard could just be deployed now in Gameweek 12, and I could go about things that way, maybe even play the free hit in Gameweek 13 to avoid Arsenal versus Chelsea and triple up on Man City against Leeds at home. So I'm keeping my options open, but I think with the wildcard in Gameweek 12, it would look something like this, with Raya and Dubravka as my goalkeepers, Senesi, potentially Mark Gay and Virgil van Dijk as my 3 main defenders, and I've got the likes of Cash and Mukiele on the bench, Saka, Ndai, Mbuma and Enzo Fernandez, who is also doubtful in the starting 11. Mateta, Haaland and Thiago is the best front 3, and it has been for quite a while now. If you have seen my wildcard videos over the last month, this has been the front 3 I've been recommending in every single one of those podcasts, but Xhaka is the other one to complete this 50-man squad. I would have 0.2 million in the bank. The expected points is 51.1, which isn't anything special, but I still think that looks pretty decent in the grand scheme of things, and Bryan Mbeumo would be one of the main contenders to rival Haaland for the captaincy in Gameweek 12, facing Everton at home, and Salah would be the other one. Some people would be very tempted to go for Salah and Haaland simultaneously, and that could be something else you could consider, especially because we get 5 free transfers in Gameweek 16 because of AFCON, so you can then spread the money around a little bit more by selling the likes of Salah and all these African players who go out to the African Cup of Nations. But that won't be the case for Semenyo and Kudus because Ghana didn't qualify for that competition, so it's worth bearing that in mind, and you might still want these players by the time we get to Gameweek 16 and 17. But this will be the free hit draft, and it offers 55.3 expected points according to FPL.team, with Sanchez, Munoz, James and Virgil van Dijk in that defensive line, Ismaila Sarr, Enzo Fernandez, Saka and Mbeumo, Mateta, Haaland and Igor Thiago, with the bench comprising of cheap players like Dubravka, Mukiele, King and Rodon, and the kind of hope there is you don't need to rely on any of them, with Enzo Fernandez being doubtful as things stand, but I think he'll start against Burnley and deliver a healthy return. So that'll be my free hit draft for Gameweek 12. And as always, I would appreciate your suggestions. Maybe you disagree with certain players. Reece James is always a bit of a rotation risk, as we saw in Gameweek 11. But if I were to free it this week, I would go for something like this and only have 1 Arsenal player, a triple up in Chelsea, probably 2 or 3 Crystal Palace players, and maybe having more Liverpool assets like Ekitike or Salah would bolster this even further. But going for Salah would require reshuffling other areas, and it might be quite difficult to get to, and it might even require downgrading someone like Haaland, which doesn't seem very viable at this moment in time. But to complete this video, I'll show you the top 10 captains for Gameweek 12, and this will be delved into in more detail during my deadline stream on Saturday. There will be a day where Erling Haaland isn't top of this captaincy list, I promise you that. When is that going to be? I couldn't really tell you, to be fair, but things can change very quickly in football and FPL. Ekitike actually makes the top 10, facing Nottingham Forest at home, but Alexander Isak is knocking on the door, and we could see the minutes shed a little bit especially Liverpool's congested fixture schedule. Being knocked out of the Carabao Cup could help them in December, but in the meantime, they've got plenty of Champions League games where they're still not in the safest of positions. They need to get some victories in that competition. And in the Premier League table, they have been, well, very lackluster over the last couple of weeks with 5 defeats up until this point. So they need to get back on track and see if they can close the gap on the league leaders. Reece James is 9th. He has a brilliant record against Burnley, and if he starts, I think he could be a very underrated option for the captaincy. Bruno Fernandes is 8th, facing Everton at home, and Antoine Semenyo is 7th, but let's see if he's available for that game this weekend. Joao Pedro is 6th, facing Burnley away, and Mateta makes the top 5 against Wolves. I think he could be the standout Crystal Palace player once again, but I wouldn't mind a Daniel Munoz or Ismaila Sarr for the armband, but I think Mateta is a bit more reliable when it comes to the potential of goal scoring and also the possibilities of returns. But Bukayo Saka is 4th, facing Tottenham Hotspur. He has a solid record against them, particularly in home matches, and Mohamed Salah is in the podium, facing Nottingham Forest at home. Bryan Mbeumo is 2nd. He's the most informed player besides the obvious Erling Haaland, who is still number 1 against Newcastle away, but hopefully we will see Haaland's form dip or other players really show consistency so we can have a more balanced debate about the captaincy, because over the last month or two, it's just been Erling Haaland, and Erling Haaland, who has been scoring for fun, for club and country, and it doesn't seem like he's going to stop anytime soon. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below as always, and thank you very much for watching this video and this podcast. If you enjoyed it or found it insightful, then like this video, subscribe to my channel, and also hit that notification bell so you're always up to date on my content for both FPL and UCL Fantasy. Keep your eyes peeled for the best wildcard and limitless squads for match day 5 in the Champions League. The same goes for my team selection over the weekend and going into Monday, and of course, another deadline stream next Tuesday. Follow me on X, Instagram and Blue Sky, DylanRCM, and check all the links in the description for my Patreon and the Championships, further access to my videos, proud comments, amongst my other perks. My Discord server, the FPL League and Spotify can also be found in the description. Let's get this video to over 150 likes and closing on new goals like 38k on YouTube. I'll see you on Saturday for the next FPL deadline stream, and stay tuned for a potential predicted lineups podcast ahead of Game Week 12.